Hey everyone, welcome to episode 53 of PixlFeed Radio, and I'm here with my friend Scott Christianson. How you doing, Scott? How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's a wonderful fall day here in Columbia, Missouri.
Nice. It's beautiful here in Florida too, but well, actually, no, it's kind of cloudy because of the hurricane. It's hitting the coast, but it's all good. So for those of you that don't know, Scott, he's a professor at Trulaske College of Business. He teaches courses focused on information systems, project management, blockchain, AI. He knows it all. So I'm really excited to have him on because we're totally going to geek out on this because this is what I love. And you actually believe that COVID pushed us forward in terms of technology, right? I also believe the same thing. It was like a pivoting moment we needed to have, and it just happened all at once. So you are a professor, but you're also an entrepreneur. But before we get into the whole geeky side of things, why don't you tell us your story? How, when you were a kid, I mean, imagine you're tinkering with a million things, where you're taking things apart and then started figuring out a way to make money with it. How does the whole story go?
Well, I wasn't as good at the money part of things, at least to start out with, but my dad was a machinist by trade, and he was always very curious. And so he was, in fact, giving me like old lawnmowers that I could turn into go-karts and doing all sorts of weird stuff like that when I was young. So he had a very curious mind, and I was lucky to be around him, and got to get involved in some electronics and got involved in some technology. He bought me my first Apple IIe computer. We weren't very well off, but he made the sacrifice to make sure I had that back in the 80s. And that really started me on this
computer.
Yeah, on
Apple
that road.
Yeah. I was lucky. My dad I just got lucky that my dad just bought one because my dad's not even a computer guy. He wasn't a computer guy at the time. He just like, oh, I heard this thing's cool. So I bought one for the house, and and I actually pissed him off because I took it apart when he brought it to the house, and I managed to put it back together and it worked. So, I didn't get in that much trouble, but yeah, that was my first computer. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you. It just popped in my head.
Oh, no, that was just the exploration of something you could be creative with. So sometimes you think about technology as being kind of cold, but it's really a very creative enterprise when you're working in programming or doing anything like that. And I still like to do that kind of work, even though I'm not, doing that for a living anymore. I used to do some microcontroller programming for audiovisual systems when I was running my business, but I like to play around with little things called Arduinos. So they're little tiny open source hardware, as well as Raspberry Pis, although I'm not as good at that, I have to admit. But I like to play around with that stuff, and it's really kind of an amazing time to be living. I mean, we thought it was great with those Apple IIes, but my goodness, the ways that you can develop new products and innovate is just unbelievable right now. And I'm just we're recording this a couple days after we had a Tiger Hacks competition where we have students from all over University of Missouri and the University of Missouri system come together for 36 hours, and they hack together different programs and different applications. And it was just amazing. There was at least 3 of them that I judged that you had these 20-year-olds using AIs, right? So they were like, oh, I dumped all the COVID information from the CDC and these other websites into here, and I created a chat bot with AI. And here's my demo of it. And you're just sitting there going, okay, they created this in 30 hours. I mean,
I know, it's pretty crazy. It's insane. Like I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day. He passed us a video. I specialize in marketing, obviously, with Facebook ads and all that stuff. But he sent a video of this not even college students, just high school dropout kids who moved from Kansas to LA, rented a mansion in the hills because they already have a brand, like a quote unquote streetwear brand, and they're killing it. They're making so much money, and all it took was their phones and a TikTok account and an Instagram account. And it's like, I tell people all the time, I'm like, you guys, if you're not figuring out a way how to make money online or how to better yourself or take advantage of what we have now, I don't know what you're doing, because it's literally all you have to just type it in Google and you'll get a million things for free. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have that. You didn't have that when you were a kid. You had to go searching for the information the hard way, like go to the library and stuff like that. Right. I had to do that until I was, I guess the internet, quote unquote, became popular when I was 13 and we moved to the States and we had AOL, but it was so basic back then that you still couldn't find everything you can find now, obviously. So you still had to do research on your own and go to libraries and stuff like that. But There's so much that we can do now, especially that's why, the other thing I want to talk to you was blockchain and AI and all that good stuff, because people get confused with all that stuff. So, but so they built the chat bots, which, that's pretty cool. What else, what other kinds of things did they build?
Another one had an AI that he used gesture recognition. So he could be in his car and he could control his Android phone. So he could do different gestures for Spotify playlists. And then he could pick up a text message or something like that with a certain gesture he would make. I'm trying to remember. I'm kind of blanking on the other ones, but there were some pretty creative things that they came up with. And once again, it's kind of just like taking these tools and putting them together. So I sometimes call it copy and paste programming, or even copy and paste hardware. So you go out there and like Instructables or YouTube or any of these sites, and there's all these how-tos. Here's how you make a little widget that will do this and that. Well, I need part of that in my project, and here's another tutorial, and I kind of glom these together. And so it's kind of like copy and paste, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think it's just a great time to think about new ideas and to be ready to innovate. And I tell my students, don't wait. Now, just get out there and try it. Start now.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, like, dude, it's never going to be perfect. Just do it. Listen, just do it. You're going to mess up. It's going to happen, but you're going to learn from it. So, just do it. I think the biggest problem that people run into, from my experience, that people that I talk to, is like, they want everything to be perfect before they launch, or everything little. I get it. I'm a perfectionist too when it comes to things like that. But I've gotten to the point where, like, you know what? It's never going to be perfect when I launch. I'm just going to do it. And then I figure out what's wrong, and then reverse engineer it and figure out what's wrong one by one, and fix one by one, and take them all out until it reaches that level that I want. For example, I just started a series on my YouTube video where I launch a new brand, a new store. And, usually it's a product that no one else has. So I have no data of if people liked it or not before we decided to do the brand. Usually with stores, like, when you launch a new store, a new brand with Facebook ads or Google ads or marketing, anything like that, the way you do it is you find a product that's already selling, and then you find the manufacturer, and then you brand it as your own. Or you don't even have to brand it as your own. You just buy it in bulk, and you already know it's selling somewhere else. So you launch the store, run the ads, and it's going to sell. That's not the case with this. Even though that I know from the research that I did that people like it, it's not proven yet. So I actually started a series. I'm like, listen, because there's all these videos out there where people show it's like, oh, I launched a new store and I made thousands of dollars on day one. And I'm actually showing how it made a little bit of money at first, and now it's not. And now I'm trying to figure out why it's not, even though the products are winners and I have the data to back it up. So actually I'm going through a whole series of like, all right, this is what I'm going to do this week. I'm going to change this, and that. And you'll see it improve, because I want people to see that not everything's perfect. And there's actually a process to fixing things and making it perfect. Everybody sees the overnight success, but they don't see what took to get there in the first place, right?
Well, there's two things that you're doing perfectly there. One is you have to be willing to experiment, right? So I tell my students, you don't come up with an idea and you build it and you brand it and then finally go to the customer. What you want to do is come up with an idea and go to your customer. And that may be interviewing people, that may be just launching something that is maybe not perfect. And I always say that, and I'm not the first one to say this, that good or done is better than perfect, right?
Right.
So getting it out there. The other thing is that you're taking on a challenge and you're going to learn new things that you're going to be able to use. Maybe this will, I hope it's going to be successful, but let's say it's not. You're going to be able to use the skills that you're learning right now in a new enterprise. And so I always tell my students, try to, when you're taking on a project, especially if it involves some risk and you might not succeed, make sure you're learning something new, because that's really what you're taking away from these various ventures. And we have a big problem with that, with students wanting everything to be perfect before they launch it. And I say, hey, you can get a lot of data with something you design in 10 minutes. So.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I'm like, listen, like I would say 80% of my projects that I've launched, they're failures, but I learned from all of them, because when I was doing it at that time, I was learning something new, and I still learn something new every day. There's always something new. So what I learned from those failures, it's what made the successful ones what they are today. So it works out at the end. But people, I didn't think so either at the time. And you just got to learn the hard way, and then you apply that knowledge, and then it works, But it's like you said, the problem is everybody wants success right away, overnight. And hey, it could happen. We all want it, right? If you launch something, you want it to be successful right away. But the reality is like 99% of those projects are not going to be successful overnight. Very rare that happens. So,
well,
anyway.
Getting back to YouTube too, is you got to not pattern yourself out of other people's successes. So I'm not going to be a dynamic TikTok star or something like that, right? So I'm not going to be one of these YouTubers living in a mansion, but I've got a YouTube video that makes me about $25 a month, and has it for maybe a decade or so now.
There you go.
It's a 3-minute video on how to change working times in Microsoft Project. How to change calendars and working times in Microsoft Project. Now, why do I make money in that? I don't know if you ever tried to change the working times or calendars in Microsoft Project, but it's a royal pain in the butt. And so the first thing that anybody does is they play around with it, and after 10 minutes, they go, to heck with this. I'm going on YouTube. They search, they find the video, and they watch it.
Right.
Same thing with how to tie a bow tie. So before COVID, once or twice a year, I would have to get my tux out and I would tie a bow tie. Well, what is the first thing that I did? I queued up a YouTube video, sometimes with 30 million views. Of how to tie a bow tie.
Absolutely.
I mean, you got to find your particular niche. If you repair washers and dryers, make videos about how to repair washers and dryers, because I guarantee you I will be watching your videos the next time I have to repair my washer or dryer.
I do it all the time. I Google it. Like every time I need, Google it. Just Google it. I tell people that just Google it. It'll come up. Something will come up. If it doesn't, I mean, it'll be crazy, but most of the time it's going to come up. So, all right, cool. So let's talk about, let's geek out a little bit here. So I don't even know if I want to start with AI or blockchain. I think, let's start with blockchain because, what do you call it? I just went blank. Bitcoin. Bitcoin was huge, a couple of years ago when everybody jumped in the bandwagon without knowing what it was or any of that stuff. And everybody always says, and I know this, that the money's not, part of it's in certain coins, but most of the money is in the technology and what you can do with the technology. So for those of people watching or listening right now that don't know what blockchain actually is, can you explain it in simple terms of what it does and why it's so valuable?
So blockchain does often get confused with Bitcoin, but you should really not consider these to be synonymous, because a blockchain is a separate kind of database technology, or we would call it a distributed ledger. So let's say that we were storing grades for my students. Now, normally I submit those all to a central database, the registrar, and all the other faculty do as well. But if we decide, let's get rid of the registrar, and we will all just store not only our students' grades, but all the students' grades. And so all have a copy of that. Okay, so every faculty member has a copy of all the grades of all the students. So that's one thing, is it's distributed. There's no central authority. And how we agree on what is in that ledger is kind of interesting, because there's some math involved when we make an entry into the ledger. And the math involved is in making something called a hash. So let's say that Amy gets an A in Parks. Okay, so that's the class she took, that's the grade and her name. Well, we enter that into our ledger, but then we take the name Amy and the grade A and Parks, the name of the course, and we take all that and we run it through some math, and we come up with something called a hash. And this is a hash that usually has some particular mathematical property. And if you ever heard of Bitcoin miners on the Bitcoin blockchain, they're getting paid for doing that work. It's called a proof of work. Well, I would record that, make my little hash. I'd announce it to all the faculty members. They'd agree that I, in fact, calculated that correctly. So as soon as 51% of them agree with me, we'd say that's valid. Then we would enter the next entry down. So it would be John. So John took algebra and he got an F. Okay, so John takes algebra and gets an F. I do the same sort of thing, but I also include Amy's hash in that calculation for John's hash. This is the way they get linked together. Then we go on and Scott gets a C in English, and we include John's hash in Scott's hash calculation. So they're all kind of wired together. Okay, so here's, and I hope that makes a little bit of sense. If anybody's interested, I do have a game I play that actually does this. It's called the blockchain game, and I do that in public venues over Zoom from time to time. But the neat thing about this is, let's say that John comes to me, says, okay, well, Scott looks like he's pretty cheap. Here's $100 to turn my F into an A. And, I would say, sure, that sounds great. I'll take the $100 and I'll change that F into an A. Well, what happens is that then changes the hash calculation for John and for any subsequent entries. So we say that this is immutable. Okay, so it actually get rejected. So that change would get rejected. So we say it's an immutable ledger, so you can't change it. So when it came to Bitcoin, this fact that you can't change it eliminated a problem with previous cryptocurrencies called double spend, where maybe I'd send you some money through a cryptocurrency, and then I would send somebody else some same money. But because it's immutable, and because there's this calculation that goes into it, it says, okay, well, Scott, you sent that money to so-and-so, you can't send it to someone else. Okay, so that kind of gets to the basics of it. That's an immutable ledger and it's distributed. Well, you can imagine fields like accounting. They're very interested when you talk to them and say, hey, we have a ledger that can't be tampered with. Okay, so if you think about all the time that goes into auditing different ledgers or spreadsheets or databases, well, now we don't have to do that anymore. Or maybe we don't have to do that anymore. We can free up our accountants to do other types of work. And so that's one of the interesting things about blockchain. The other one that's very interesting is you can actually execute smart contracts. So let's say that I'm going to sell you some widgets for $1 million. I don't know you. What I'm going to have you do is go to your bank, get a letter of credit. They're going to send that letter of credit to my bank, and then they'll send it to me and say, okay, we'll guarantee the $1 million worth of widgets. But they're going to take a cut out of that, right? So instead, we could have a smart contract where you kind of escrow the dollars in the blockchain, and then when the widgets arrive and you take them off the ship or the truck, that smart contract executes and I get my money. So there's lots of interesting developments there. And so that's where there's a lot of interest right now.
So it's automated, basically. It's like at a full-blown automation where you don't have to deal with it. So it could be applied. I'm just trying to think of what business. I mean, I'm pretty sure it can be applied to any other business you can think of. But somebody brought it up to me, and this is years ago, so I don't remember exactly, that they were working on using it for real estate to keep track of the contracts and all that stuff. So now that you break it down that way, I can see how it can be applied and be completely automated, because when you're dealing with banks, you're dealing with contracts between the buyer and the seller, escrow, money, and all that stuff. So basically, it's basically keeping track of everything that's going on and nobody can tamper with it. And that's what makes it so valuable.
Yeah, it's an immutable ledger. That's probably the main characteristic that makes it very valuable. Also, these entries, as they're getting made, they're being signed. So I'm signing the entry into there. So it's authenticated that I have cryptographically signed that Scott is doing this. Scott's giving this Bitcoin to somebody. Scott is selling this house to somebody. And it's actually interesting. I don't think it's going to be that common in the US when it comes to personal property, but there's a lot of countries that do not have as good of personal property records as we do. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to be more likely to want to invest in something that is a mutable ledger, that you can't have corruption. So I can't buy some official off to say that your property belongs to me, okay, which happens in other countries.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see it actually deployed in other countries where they're going to kind of leapfrog and not have that central system. We have a very good system of keeping track of property records and keeping track of loans and things like that. And so I think it's actually going to be in other countries where we're going to see the usage first.
So what is it that make it so secure? What is it that makes it so someone can't, let's say, just to use the term, hack it? What is it that makes it so secure? Because that's what makes it valuable too.
So it's this math that goes into these hashes, and the complex math. The hashes can't be really reverse engineered, and so the amount of work that goes into those hashes, it would be impossible to really garner enough computing power, or you would have to get 51% of all the people or all the nodes on your network to be corrupt. Okay,
which is not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. So while I might be able to be bought off for $100 as a faculty member to change a grade, certainly my colleagues
allegedly.
Right, allegedly. Yes, I should say that. I don't want to end up in the front of the newspaper or something here in Columbia, Missouri, but so that's the kind of the concept. So that's why it's generally considered to be not hackable per se. Yeah. Now, a lot of people are suspicious because they hear about Bitcoin and they hear about different problems with it. Often that is because people have disclosed something called their private key. So when I said that I use that signature, there's actually something called public-private key encryption that's part of this. And so I have my private key and I keep that private, and I have my public key and I can give that out. So if you wanted to send me some Bitcoin, I would send you my public key and you'd send it to that. I can then use my private key to verify that I own that asset. Okay. So that's where people get tripped up, is if I say, send me your private key and I'll send you some Bitcoin. No, actually, as soon as I get your private key, I'm going to steal all of your Bitcoin.
Yeah,
and I can authenticate it. And you may have heard of various cases a couple of years back in like late 2017 when Bitcoin was reaching these really high levels. There'd be like some poor guy that was out in the New Jersey landfill looking for a mobile phone or for a PC that had $10 million of Bitcoin on it.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't actually have the $10 million of Bitcoin. It had his private key.
Right.
So he couldn't actually prove that he owned that Bitcoin.
It was a hard drive, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, hard drive or something like that. So
what do you think? What do you think we're going to go with in the future? Obviously, it's going to be a while before it's streamlined, but I can use it, but I'm a geeky guy, so I don't really have per se like real use for it yet. I have it, I guess I've done it with friends and whatever, but when do you think it's going to be years and years and years from now? Because the banking system, it's like, no. Like, this is going to affect us way too much. So unless they take it in somehow, it's going to be a while before it's mainstream.
I can see some sort of, crypto dollar that's tied to the dollar. But bankers and our finance friends would say that Bitcoin is not money because it doesn't have a store of value. And there has also been this issue that Bitcoin kind of almost has a subculture around it. A lot of like, oh, screw the government. I'm going to have I don't want them to manipulate the currency. And certainly, that's a concern maybe, but it's just become, like I said, kind of a little subculture in some ways. So I think it's going to be a while, but I do think it's interesting. Sometimes it takes a long time for these digital technologies to catch on. So the first digital camera was invented by Kodak in the mid-70s. So they didn't see any use for it because they said, how are we going to sell more film and chemicals? And that doesn't
I didn't know that. I didn't know they've been around for that long. I thought they just in the 90s.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, well, that's when we started to see it, and that's when it started doubling and getting better and better and better. And Kodak, got lost behind all that, right?
Didn't pivot. Okay. All right. What about all these coins, though? This is what throws people off, too. And there's a lot of scams out there, too, with all these coins that come out overnight, and I still get confused with the coins. Like, I own a few like altcoins just to have them, and they made me money, but it's nothing crazy. What do people need to watch out for when they're seeing all these coins all over the place? This is what confuses people the most. Everybody knows mostly everybody knows what Bitcoin is, but all Litecoin and Ethereum, and I can't remember any of the others top of my head, but Why are there so many coins? Is it just like different currencies for certain things? For those that don't know, because I'm actually still confused about this a little bit. So.
Yeah, I think everybody is to some degree. Like I have an old computer over here, and it's got a bunch of hard disks on it, and it is serving up those hard disks for cloud storage to a service called StoreJ, STORJ.io, I believe it is. And they pay me in their own coin, which I can then translate into Ethereum and then translate into dollars. But it allows them to kind of almost have like their own stock, right? So it's almost like shares in the company that you're getting as part of this coin. That's one of the reasons the SEC has investigated a lot of these coins, because there is this idea, if you are investing in a startup, you should be some sort of qualified investor. So you should know a little bit about what you're doing. So in the US, that means you have $1 million in assets, or you make several $100,000 a year. In other words, if you lose your money on some startup, it's your own damn fault, right?
Right.
They don't want, grandpa and grandma putting their life savings into some, Scott's weird startup and having it go under. There have been a lot of scams with some of these coins. I always tell my students, do not consider it an investment. Just consider it to be something you play with. So if you take $100 and you're fine with losing $100, then play with these little coins and you can see, kind of what it's about. I happen to get really lucky on the Bitcoin and market, and if I was younger, I'd consider myself an expert on investing, but I have many other examples that would show that I'm not an expert in investing. But I got involved when a guest speaker came, I think 2014, Andreas Antonopoulos. He wasn't famous then, but he's now a famous Bitcoin guy, and came to my class, and I was just transitioning to working as a teacher, and I had a job come in for consulting, and I thought, I'll put $3,000 in this Bitcoin thingy. And then 2017, it was just going up and down like crazy. And I'm a conservative investor. I put, my money in every month into a little index fund, and that's it, right?
Right.
And so I was just about to lose it. I couldn't stand it. So I sold at the high, but it was not because I was a genius. It was just I couldn't take the stress anymore.
Right. My Bitcoin story is in 2010, I just got done building a computer. I've been building my own computers since I was a kid. And I just spent all this money on my latest rig, for gaming and stuff like that. And one of my really good friends, who's total computer nerd too, he's like, dude, we gotta push that new video card to the limit. Let's see how much it can take. I'm like, okay, what do we do? How do we benchmark it? Well, let's overclock it and let's try to. Have you heard of Bitcoin? I'm like, yeah, a little bit. It's like, why don't we try mining some Bitcoin? Let it mine like overnight and just let it sit there mining. And then so I did. And then my card was overheating, and I'm like, dude, I don't want to burn through this card. I spent like $600 on this video card. I'm not going to burn the processor on it. I'm like, screw that. It's like, whatever. And then I just forgot about it. And then sure enough, I have no idea where that mining went, which it was nothing. It was a couple of days. So it was really nothing, but it might be worth something to that. I don't know how much, because I didn't even know how much it was, but I was just, I didn't know any better. So I was like, I'm not going to burn my $600, video card. And now look back, I should have burned the whole thing down. But, if we could all see the future, we would all be trillionaires, right?
Yeah. Hindsight's 2020. I was telling my students about looking at the internet for the first time in the 90s. And I actually have email correspondent with a friend of mine that was out in DC at the time. And we said, well, what if we just bought generic domain names like flowers.com?
Oh my God.
And we went back and forth. I swear to God, that's the exact example we used. And we decided it was too expensive because it's like $50 a domain. And nobody's going to do that. That doesn't make any sense. Of course, flowers.com sold for like $2 million after that. So, hindsight is always 2020. So
I remember telling my dad, I still make jokes about it around the house. I'm like, I told my dad to buy Yahoo. I told my dad to buy Google. I told my dad like all the tech stocks, and he never listened to me. And I'm like, yeah, should have listened to me. He's like, but it's like, I get it. You know what I mean? It was all new. Like you just didn't know where it was going. But anyway, so let's get into all right. So that's blockchain, all that stuff. That's good info. let's get into AI, because I think AI, it's still a little bit, people think that it's this thing that's going to kill us all, like Skynet. And depending on what you're doing, AI can be pretty dumb. Like when it comes to Facebook ads, like they're all about the algorithm. Oh, the algorithm does everything. It's so smart. I'm like, no, it's dumb. I still have to steer it, and half of the time it doesn't work like it's supposed to. So I feel like the term AI, it's thrown out there as a marketing term way too much. Yeah. And they try to sell you things that are not real AI, like, what's the name of Google DeepSeek or whatever? What was the AI that beat that game in China, the world champion?
Oh, the AlphaGo?
AlphaGo. Like, that's real AI. It learns, it keeps learning, and then it does its thing. But that term is thrown around too much. So I tell people all the time, like, I have this arguments with my father-in-law. Well, not anymore, because now he gets it. But I used to get into this arguments with my father-in-law about Tesla. That Tesla is the biggest ripoff ever, and the cars are never going to make it. They're going to go under because blah, blah. And I kept trying to explain, like, dude, the money's not in the car itself. It's in the data that they have been collecting since day one, that they can license to everyone else and, do whatever they want with it. That's where the real money's at. It's not. It's the AI, the actual technology behind the car that can drive itself. And it took a couple of years, but he finally, I got through his head. So let's talk about AI. Like, what is the definition of AI, of the simplicity of how it works, so people can understand how it works, and then we can move on to more advanced, things with it.
So AI is a really broad term. So it ranges from everything like the Skynet examples to, something very simple that is a very simple machine that can make a decision based on its environment, like a Roomba. I hit the wall, I'll turn a little bit this way. I hit the wall again, I'll turn a little bit this way. So there's a wide range there. But I think you're exactly right about people misusing the term AI, because AI, for a lot of people, means, something you could talk to, something that would be like a human, that would have that type of human intelligence. So whenever you see the word AI, substitute machine learning. Okay, so that's a narrow form of AI. It's a very powerful form of AI, but what it allows us to do is to set up a machine with certain configuration parameters so that it can learn from training data. So if I want to teach my computer the difference between a wrench and a cat and a rocket ship, I could sit there and try to program, okay, well, a rocket ship has these characteristics, a cat has these characteristics, and a wrench has these characteristics. That would take me a long time to work out all the different use cases. So instead, we can kind of set up this computer in a way that it can learn, and we just feed it a whole bunch of pictures of cats, a whole bunch of pictures of wrenches, and a whole bunch of pictures of rocket ships. And it will figure out on its own what are some of the differences here, or will reinforce some of the pathways that it uses to classify these things, and can then be as accurate as a human at knowing the difference between these, and sometimes even goes beyond it. So there's certain fields where this is going to help you and me in some big ways. So think about medicine. Think about your radiologist. What do? They recognize patterns. Think about your pathologist. If you had a biopsy or something like that, they're going to look at that tissue and they recognize patterns. Cardiologist looks at all those EKG lines and they recognize patterns. Well, this is a great application for machine learning, because we can just feed it lots of known data. Here's people with this type of cancer. Here's where it looked like it was cancer, but it wasn't. Here's just normal tissue, so forth and so on. And then it can be as accurate as a doctor, but also can be much faster. And so I think that's going to help us all benefit and maybe live longer lives. There's been about 50 machine learning algorithms that have been approved for human use right now. So they're actually being able to be deployed. And I think, that's one of the kind of bright sides. The other side is the negative side that you're talking about, where maybe Facebook isn't serving up stuff that's that great, but is it enough to keep you on the site? Because really, that's all it's optimizing for. It's not optimizing for anything else. It just says, hey, let's keep this guy angry. Let's keep him, excited.
Engaged.
Let's keep him on the site. So they're very powerful, but they're also very narrow. So you can't take that AI that we've trained to detect pneumonia or to detect a particular cancer and then say, okay, can you drive my car? right?
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. If you start to get these machine learning algorithms, you can train better. And you think about something as complex as driving, that becomes an asset. I was with my students in Berlin before all this COVID hit. I took them over the winter break. We visited a startup there. They had these little machines that could grab things that were on a factory floor and run them around, and they would know the most efficient way to get there, including where the other robots were and everything. And so one of my students asked, well, how much does one of these robots cost? And he's like, oh, like 8,000 euros. And everybody was, that's not very expensive. And I said, well, how much is the computer that controls all the robots cost? They're like, oh, that's 5 million euros.
Yes.
That's a starting point. And then we
That's
go up
funny.
from there. So you're exactly right, because we have these little kind of dumb Internet of things. And in fact, this is a little thing right here. This is from a company called Cardia, and I just play with it, but it will do a 6-lead EKG. It ties to my phone. So this just...
Hold on. For those who are listening and not watching the YouTube, what are you holding right there? What is it's like a little box?
It's just a little, it has 3 metal pieces on it, and it's something that is probably like a huge stick of gum.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Looks like a case.
Yeah. And so this would connect to my phone. This doesn't have much intelligence in it. My phone doesn't have much intelligence in it. But what it does is it can send that data, raw data, up to the cloud. It can then get that intelligence there in the cloud. And so they've actually been able to use this and patent some algorithms that will help people determine like their potassium levels. And there's certain people that have certain diseases that need to check that on a fairly regular basis. And it turns out that rather than getting a blood test, you can actually use an EKG and a little device like this to estimate your potassium levels.
That is pretty amazing. That's pretty cool. The other thing that it's like I was talking about earlier, like people are misinformed that it's going to be the end of the world and blah blah blah, and people don't understand that you still you set your own boundaries when it comes to these things, because you have to program it, you have to teach it, and even though it's learning on its own, those parameters are still going to be set there, so they can't be overwritten. What's the word in English? Overridden? Is that a right?
Yeah, they're not going to go outside of their case, right? So you're teaching something to identify different types of food. It's going to do that. It's not going to decide, I want to identify different types of spiders or something.
Yeah. But and then I think obviously we're going to get to a point where it's just going to be amazing. I mean, the things that are going to be possible are amazing, especially with quantum computing possible now. And it's like literally you can go to AWS and get your own, quantum computing server. It's very expensive, but anybody can have access to it. With that technology, for those that don't know how quantum computing works, hopefully I don't butcher this, but I know how it works in my own head. But it's basically the cores can multiply at the same time or something like that. So you're processing more data at the same time a lot faster, and it never ends. That's the dumb way of me explaining it. How will you explain it?
So right now, all of our computers are basically binary. They do ones or zeros. That's
Correct.
it. Okay. They just do trillions and trillions of them, right? Very quickly. If you get to something that is quantum, you can have more than one state. So it can be a 0, 1, or 3, or 4, or something else. So you just think of the amount of information you can store if you are not limited by just using ones and zeros. Beyond that, your guess is as good as mine. That's not an area I really follow, except to see the headlines.
Well, basically what it comes down to is it's a lot more math, a lot faster, which means more processing power. So something that, it's like the evolution of computers from the 90s up until now. It's just like, I remember, I talked about this before. I remember in the 90s, because I got my first Pentium chip computer. And then literally the next weekend on the paper, here's Pentium 100 and something. And the next weekend, the newest one is out, 225 megahertz. Like, you just couldn't keep up. Like, you will buy a computer or a parts, and then it'll be completely obsolete in like a month. Right. So I think that's what's going to happen with quantum computing when it comes more mainstream. It's just the amount of data that we're going to be able to process at the same time. It's going to take everything to the next level. And that's what I think it's really going to take AI to the next level when it comes down to, everyday stuff. Like, I keep talking about Facebook ads because that's what I use for a living every day. And those who are probably watching this, most of them know how Facebook ads works. It's basically an algorithm based on an auction, and based on what you target, the AI, you put your bid on the auction, and it's basically raising your hand. And if you win the auction, your ad gets served to the person who's most likely to commit what your objective is. Let's say a purchase, or add to cart, or give me a lead, your email. And suppose the AI learns. Like, I know for a fact that the way it works is when you upload something to Facebook, whether it's a picture or video, it will identify anything that's in the picture and the video, even if it's the Nike logo by brand or anything like that. It'll say male, female, 30 to 40 age. There's a TV in the background, or there's a car. And it's getting better and better at recognizing the actual brands, so they can target your ads based on the brand that you're wearing. And then it listens to the video of his video. So that's how it generates the captions automatically. So now they have all the copy of what you just said, and then the machine actually matches this all together to what you're trying to sell. And that's why it's so freaking powerful, because they have all this data on you. So it's getting better and better, but we're still not, they're still on I want to say quote unquote regular servers, but they're not using any type of supercomputing at the moment yet. But when they reach that level, they can afford it. That's going to be a game changer. I mean, you're going to throw an ad and the computer's going to go, okay, this person spends this much with this credit card, buys this stuff. The possibility of them pulling the trigger on this is 99.999%. And boom, sure enough, the sell will come through. And that's pretty exciting stuff, because it's not only ads with like Facebook, but I mean, just there's going to be so many new industries that are going to come out of this. I mean, you're going to be able to start a business that pretty much runs itself. You just need the idea, because like you were saying earlier, their tools are going to be out there. But then there's the bad side of things too. Like already in China, they have a scoring system for every citizen where they scan your face. That's how you pay. They scan your face. And if people give you a bad, it's like the episode of Black Mirror. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah.
Somebody gives you a bad review, then you're a bad citizen, and you get like blocked out of like loans and all this crazy stuff. That's the scary part.
It's not even just that someone else, it's the facial recognition sees Scott jaywalking and throwing a cigarette down on the street.
Yeah.
And so now Scott gets dinged because, we automatically detected that. So yeah, it's all these things can be used for good or for evil. So we tend to think of technology as being somehow objective. It's not necessarily objective, and it doesn't have any moral compass. And so, that's where we come in, right?
Yeah. Do you think, I know Elon Musk was like deadly afraid of it, but I think he's exaggerating a little too much on it. But that's the other thing, that he came up with that Neuralink. And Neuralink connects to your brain. So at first, they're going to use it to cure disease like Parkinson's and stuff like that, which is amazing. But I think, I know for a fact that's going to be the beginning of like human machine integration, because right now we have our phones. So we have everything disposable at a palm of our hands. But the goal for the Neuralink, it's like the Matrix. It's like you'd be able to access all that information through your brain, through just thoughts. That blows my mind. It's like, how is that even possible? Like, you know what I mean? It's crazy. And that's I don't know. It's just insane. What do you think about? What's your opinion on that?
Well, it may be because of my age, but I would rather slow down than like accelerate my integration with technology. I'd rather go read a book and, have a nice cup of coffee in the morning, rather than be hooked up to some Matrix thing and learn how to, fly a helicopter or something. But
give me that hit. I want to know it now. Just give it to me. But
right. Yeah. So, I think it's one of those things that just because you can do it, should you do it? I think there are some great applications there. I do worry about our use of technology. I think COVID has accelerated that as well. I often do a social media inventory with my students, and it was bad before, but now sometimes they're spending 8 hours a day on social media. I think we're doom scrolling. We're nervous, about a lot of different things. So I think we got to think about how do we unplug from that, because I'm sure that with what you do, you're not, doing 10 things at once or have 10 windows open. You've got to concentrate on your product, right? You got to concentrate. Well, at some point, at some point you got to concentrate, right? So you got to take time out. You got to do this podcast. You got to sit down and have a block of time where you're working on something. And I would say if you're one of those people that can do that and can disengage, you're probably going to do better. You're going to probably be making the stuff that other people are engaging with rather than being distracted all the time.
I tell people all the time, because I'm guilty of spending time on social media. I mean, I got to know what's going on. That's my excuse. I got to know what's going on because that's what I make my living. But, I found myself sometimes on the couch scrolling through TikTok for like 2.5 hours. And I'm like, oh my God, I just wasted 2.5 hours scrolling through TikTok, right? That's when you're like, okay, self-check. Like, I can't do that, And I've noticed too, I grew up reading a lot of books. I always loved reading. And I've noticed that it's gotten to a point now where when I sit down and try to read, I can't, I zone out after like a couple of pages. There's times I'm reading a book and I'm actually into it and I'm reading, and then I go, I have no idea what I just read in the last 2 pages. And I have to go back and like reread it. And that has to be due to the short burst of information that I experience all day long, because
I have that too when I pick up reading again. So it's been a kind of a rough semester for all of us here. And so I'm finally getting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm starting to read again. But I noticed that same phenomenon that I would read like 3 pages and then I'd be like, I don't understand who this person is that they're talking about. And so now I got to go back and kind of catch up and reread it. And but it's just a habit. It's like any other habit. If you keep it up, if let's say that I was a weightlifter and had not been weightlifting for the last 8 months, well, I probably couldn't, bench what I was doing before. It'd probably feel a little bit hard, right?
Yeah.
To do that. So it's the same sort of thing. It's kind of like muscle memory. You start to get your brain is more oriented toward that. So, same thing with writing. The more you write, the better writer you are and the easier it comes. I also find the more I read, the better writer I am. So it makes me better at writing as well. But yeah, and it's interesting talking about writing. I was looking at, I'm trying to redo my website and I'm trying to have something where it pulls in my Medium articles and it sucks it into my website, trying to like you, trying to get myself out there a little bit more.
Right.
And I was looking at some of the software, and there's some that what it will do is from grabbing that off a Medium and putting it on your website, it will rewrite it using an AI. So there's one called Word AI. I don't know if it's Word.ai or Word AI.
I haven't heard of this one.
It'll rewrite it. It's called a respinner, they call them. So people in content marketing use this a lot. And it was fascinating because I was showing my students this. And I said, oh, this is kind of interesting. I didn't know this occurred. Well, we have a plagiarism checking tool called Turnitin. And one of my students said, hey, would this beat Turnitin? So could Scott, submit his paper, and then we run it through a respinner, and then Christian submits the same paper and is not shown as being plagiarism. So we're currently running this experiment. About 20 of my students sent me their papers that they had done in previous classes. And so I'm going from the original score and then I'm trying different ones. Now, the big thing is going to be whether this is any way readable at the end of all this. So that's going to be interesting. So it's kind of an escalating race, in some of these areas of an AI versus an AI. And
I'm so glad I went to school before all the plagiarism tools. I'm not gonna lie, because I just grab stuff, copy paste, rewrite it a little bit, turn it in. It's like I was a horrible student. I had good grades, but I was a horrible student. That's why I dropped out and started a business. And thank God it worked out. But
right.
I told even though that I did it, and I was lucky that I was able to be successful and all that stuff, but I still regret not finishing. I still regret not having the degree from Florida State on my wall, even though it wouldn't make a difference with what I do today. But I had a good time while I was there. And it's just, I didn't care at the time, but now I look back, I'm like, man, those 2 extra years would have been a lot of fun, And I just had a kid and I want him to go to college, even though he's probably going to learn all this stuff from me, just being around me. It's like, that's cool and all. You probably make a lot more money than I did when I was a teenager before you even consider going to college. But I still like, please just do it for your mother and I. Just go have a good time. And I think you still need that extra education. I see the difference between entrepreneurs who never went to school. I know some that are extremely successful and they dropped out in high school. And you can tell just by the way they write an email. You know what I mean? I can tell like, okay, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm not like the most educated person in the world, but I can tell the difference when it's somebody that didn't and somebody that did. And I think that it's good to have that knowledge. It's never bad to have enough knowledge.
No, and statistically, you're going to be better off. You might be the exception to the rule, but there's very few exceptions to this rule that if you go to college, you're going to make much more money over your lifetime. Mm-hmm. I will say this, college has gotten a lot better at helping students be entrepreneurs. So I have 3 students I've had the privilege of working with that have been actually quite a number that have been very successful entrepreneurs. One of them is still a student. She's a vet student, and we used an Internet of Things, one of these emerging technologies, for her to develop a collar that goes on a cow that can tell the farmer where the cow is and how close it is to giving birth. So this is important for cattle farmers. I have another woman. I didn't actually mentor her, but I got to know her. She just got $50,000 for her business. No equity. You didn't have to give up any equity. It's just a grant. And it was for she's an African-American woman. And apparently, I don't know a lot about African-American women's hair, but apparently they use braids sometimes. And these are expensive, but they're also made out of petroleum. So her original idea was, well, we'll recycle these braids. It's called rebundle. And now she's come up with, well, let's not do that. Let's actually have something that's plant-based that will naturally decompose, but also won't itch your scalp.
That's amazing.
So she's raised like 120,000.
Yeah.
And then I have another gentleman, Ed Gee. He has got this weird drone that flies like at the edge of space and can hover over an area for a very long time, like months at a time, and take pictures. So if you're looking at crops or disease or blight or something like that.
Oh, that's military stuff right there.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. And he just got a $50,000 Arch grant as well. So we're actually getting pretty good at recognizing entrepreneurs and students. So I would say if you're a student out there listening, research those places. If you're in high school, sometimes you can just go to the campus and go to their pitch competitions to see the entrepreneurs that are pitching to get money or pitching before different investors. And it's not the old business school, we're going to write a business plan now and write financials now. It's more like, let's get out there and experiment. Let's try something. Let's try a new idea. And so that has finally got into academia. And so we've had a lot of great successes here at Mizzou.
That's really cool. Well, Scott, I hate to do this, man, but we're out of time. We've been talking for an hour. I can't even tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation. I want you to come back at some point. So
that sounds great. I'd love to.
Absolutely. So for those that where can everybody find you? I'll put the links in the description, but where can everybody find you? Profiles, anything, website?
Yes. So I have a newsletter I send out. It's not commercial or anything. I'm not selling anything, but it's all the kind of neat resources I've found, books I'm reading, stuff like that. So if you go to frt.news, you'll find that there. Also, some of the things I talked about with AI, you'll find on a website, learnabout.ai, and that will take you to my website. And I've got various links, various apps you can try out, various YouTube videos that tell you about AI and have different opinions about where all this stuff is going.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for so much for listening. Remember to like the video if you're on YouTube and subscribe. And thank you listening for the podcast. Scott, again, thank you so much for coming on. I can't even tell you how much I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Okay.
See you guys soon.